Hey, thanks for being here. How you feeling? Yeah. Awesome. We had a great kickoff with our first session here at the World Music Pre-Conference at APAP. How many of you don't know what APAP is? Raise your hand. Well, that's probably a good thing. Just if you're too embarrassed to raise your hand, APAP is a performing arts organization. It's a member organization that hosts this huge conference. Thousands of artists perform over the next few days. Not just world music, jazz, classical, dance, theater, all sorts of genres of music and other performing arts. There's a whole trade hall that takes place in this building during the conference, which launches Friday afternoon, where booking agents have stands, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of concerts get booked at performing arts centers at universities and community theaters and independent presenters around the country and actually internationally as well. So in terms of, it's funny, if you know about like South by Southwest or CMJ, this is like the South by Southwest of the Carnegie Halls and the university auditoriums and things like that. It doesn't look quite as messy and drunk as South by Southwest. It has a little bit more formality to it. Thank you. And but there's actually a lot of dollars exchanged through this exchange, and a lot of great cultural productions that see the light of day as a result of this. It's kind of a big deal. So again, I'm Dmitri Vietze with Rock Paper Scissors. We're a music publicity firm, and I'm just basically here to share some of the information that I've learned and bring in some people from other parts of the industry and the field who may not normally speak to this group. And one of the biggest topics in the recorded side of the industry and in the music industry overall has been about streaming music services. The Pandoras of the world, interactive radio, the subscription streaming services like Songza and Spotify, and so many others that have emerged into the marketplace. And a lot of the discussion that we've heard is the argument about whether this is good for musicians, whether it's good for record labels, whether it's good for the industry, and also how are fans and music consumers interacting with them? Is it good for them? And what I've heard from just kind of studying the field very informally is that fans are loving it. Like, the people that actually engage with it have access to so much more music than ever. They have the ability to discover so much more music than ever. They can carry music in their pocket, thousands and thousands of tracks that's not even downloaded onto their phone yet, but they can access it from their phone. They can plug their phone into their car or into their home stereo or into their Sonos speaker system or whatever else. And everywhere they go, they can listen to more music today than even existed, a couple of decades ago from the beginning of time, because more and more music's being created and it's being uploaded and accessed. So the big question is, can musicians and can record labels sustain with streaming services? What direction are these going in? I mean, part of the argument that seems to be put out there is that when we reach scale, meaning when there's enough people who are either using their eyeballs to look at ads or using their wallets to pay for a monthly subscription service, when we get enough saturation, then we'll make enough money to sustain recorded artists and recording labels and so forth. But then you hear all this pushback from artists as well, saying, but wait a second, I'm only getting a half a cent here, and I'm not hearing from my label, and there's not enough data, and I don't know what's happening, but I do know that it used to be so much better, and all these other conversations. So this, not to brag or anything, but this panel is ridiculously amazing. The four gentlemen that are sitting with me here is like top level thinkers in this field, and it's a real mix and diversity of roles. I've got Ben Sisario here, who covers the music industry for the New York Times. He used to be more of a music critic there, but now is more focused on the industry side and is one of the greatest thinkers and writers on emerging news on the digital side of the music industry. He doesn't agree with that, but that's my personal opinion. And Drew is here with Pandora, one of the largest radio station in the world, I believe.
It's the largest internet radio station in the world by several times over margin.
But do you have to say internet radio, or can you just say it's the largest radio station?
That's actually getting into an interesting question about what radio is in the streaming era that we'll probably get into later. But yeah, you can categorize it as the largest radio station in the world.
More people listen to Pandora than any individual terrestrial radio station.
That's true.
And so in that sense, now each person that listens creates their own little mini radio station by selecting an artist or a song or whatever. But kind of a big deal. We've got a dude from Pandora speaking to a world music event. Is that awesome? And a dude from the New York Times? What?
You do good work, Dmitri. You're very convincing.
The fella, hype man. If I'm ever a rapper, you're going to be my Flavor Flav, okay?
The fella next to him is Aram Sinnreich, who I know from the streets of New York City from my high school days as an activist here in New York. We were raising hell in the streets of New York back in the 80s.
True that.
And then it turned out that he wrote a book recently called The Piracy Crusade, which I'm sure we'll hear a little bit more about. But somehow this dude convinced somebody at some point to stop clicking on links for money or whatever it was you were doing to test people's ads or early internet research stuff.
Oh, yeah. Well, I used to be an analyst at a firm called Jupiter Research. It was like the .com 1.0 rock star internet consultancy. Obviously, it all tanked in 2001. But the job that they did try to hire me for way back in February of 1997 was sitting at a little monkey desk and pressing reload over and over again to count how many different banners showed up on websites. Fortunately,
that sounds fun. You'd like to do that, right?
During my interview, I talked them out of it, and I became a research assistant, which is how I kind of fell backwards into this awesome job of researching media and technology.
Cool. And you also teach at Rutgers.
I do. I'm a professor of media studies at Rutgers, where I focus on media and technology and civil liberties, which is equally important.
So just keep clicking on those kitten videos, people. It could lead to a career. You know what I'm saying? 2 careers at once. Down there is Dick Huey. You got a name tag now down there? Yeah.
I got a name tag.
Awesome.
Yep.
So Dick runs a firm called Toolshed. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not sure he knows exactly what it is. He used to call it digital media marketing.
My wife doesn't know what it is either.
Right. It comes out of digital media marketing. He works with a lot of really cool independent bands and electronic bands and indie rock bands and so forth, and ski resorts and various other brands. He's moving into other brands as well with the type of work he does. And he works a lot in the realm of streaming as well. He was a board member of SoundExchange, which is an organization that helps artists get paid from some of the streaming services.
From some of our panelists.
From some of our panelists, mostly Pandora, in fact, right?
Yep.
And so he has a lot of deep knowledge and understanding as a board member of SoundExchange, as well as being a marketer and a promotions person for bands, understanding how to monetize through streaming services and how to promote through streaming services and all that kind of stuff. I honestly don't even know where to start, but I pretty much just wrote the title of the session and then figured we'd figure it out here. So, streaming music services, will it sustain musicians, record labels, and the industry? Yes or no?
Can I make a suggestion?
Sure.
That before we talk about streaming music services, we talk about what make the different components of streaming music services. Let's just break
it on down, man.
Lay the groundwork a little bit.
Speak to us, brother.
Okay, so here it comes. Streaming music services, more or less broken down into 4 categories. I'm going to be corrected by somebody on this panel, but I'm going to throw out 4 of the categories. First one, on-demand streaming. That's everything from sort of the market leader at the moment, Spotify, to RDO, to Rhapsody, to any service that provides you music that's not downloaded but that's streamed. On demand, you can listen to whatever you want, whenever you want. Second category would be non-interactive streaming. So non-interactive streaming is Drew's company, Pandora, along with many others, SiriusXM, etc. This is a webcast traditionally that is not. It might be influenced by you, but you don't have the opportunity to pick the songs directly that you want to listen to. You can't pick 3 songs in a row that you want to hear. You can say, I like Guided by Voices, and so let's hear some music that makes me think of Guided by Voices. That's the second one. Third criteria would be probably performance right income, that whole side of the equation, which is a little bit more esoterical side of the business, but an important revenue stream nonetheless. And which one am I leaving out? I've got those 3. There's a 4th.
AM/FM transposed online. Do you count that as a separate category?
No, I'm not counting that as a separate category.
Cable radio?
Cable radio. Well, I suppose cable radio. So we have interactive, non-interactive.
We're illustrating how complicated this really is. The people up here don't truly have a handle on it.
Is it related
either.
to the composition? Is that what you're talking about?
Nobody has a handle on it, right? I mean, Congress, which has been trying for 16 years now to come up with a set of royalty rates, and the Copyright Office in the U.S. keep kind of reslicing the baloney, because the problem is that the technology and the consumer behaviors change faster than we can change the laws and the economies. Yep. And so that problem is really the reason that the five of us are sitting up here today talking about this subject to you guys, right? And the problem is that musicians and the people that manage musicians can't really get a handle on this stuff because it's impossible to do the math. Right? As soon as you think you know, okay, well, I'm going to get this much money from Pandora and that much money from Spotify, the rates change. I mean, you got new rates as of January 1st, right?
Yes and no. The Pandora's royalty rates are broken down in very complicated ways. There's the rights that are paid to the performer, and there's rights that are paid to the songwriter. And then those are divvied out based on other complicated ways that have much more to do with the actual agreement between the musician and the recorded master side than it does between the services royalty rates. So,
all right,
yes.
Raise your hand if you're confused. Raise your hand if it's perfectly clear and you want to explain it to us.
So there's royalty rates on these services, Pandora included, are made up of a pie, and slices of the pie can change without the rest of the pie changing. And that leads to a lot of confusion, because you might see a headline that says rates go up, rates go down, this rate court is battling this, and you might think it applies to an overall arching rule that governs royalty rates, when in the fact that's not the case at all.
I think there's two ways to look at it, and one is the very fine grain, which Dick is exactly right about how complicated this is, and the legal side to all of it, that, you know, the way Pandora licenses a song to play is different from the way Spotify licenses a song, which is different from the way terrestrial radio licenses a song, et cetera, et cetera. It's endless. But I think ultimately it's all these are all just different flavors of the same ice cream, that, you know, really it just comes down to, there's this thing called streaming music, which is different from a CD and which is different from a download. And, you know, there's going to be a pot of money that is going to come into the industry, and it's going to make its way to artists, and, you know, the problem here is not, I think the problem that we're talking about is, you know, the rates that all these streaming services pay, they differ slightly from one another, and for all kinds of reasons, but basically they're a lot lower than the rates that you collect from a download.
Well, can I step in here?
Can I just finish
Yeah, go
this? And that's because instead of clicking once to buy the Beyonce album as a download and pay the $16 for it, you know, you might be clicking 500 times to stream it on Spotify, or, you know, every time that there's a song that's sort of kicked forward on Pandora, that's like another sort of click. So, you know, it's sort of gone from a world of like buying one CD and you take it home, to clicking a bunch of times to buy some tracks on iTunes, to clicking 10 zillion times on Spotify and Pandora and all the others. So, you know, there's these like orders of magnitude thing where, like, by necessity, the rates of Spotify, et cetera, are very low. But the question is, like, you know, will the billions of clicks, you know, will those billions and billions of clicks add up to enough money in the pot at the end of the day? And that's the debate that's just raging right now.
Before you jump in, Aram, I just want to point out a resource. The Future of Music Coalition put together an infographic showing the way in which money flows from these various, the things that Dick started off trying to show, like there's these different things. And the reason he wanted to show you there are these different streams of income and how it flows is because the way the revenue gets split, or the way the fees that these services pay get split between an artist, a record label, SoundExchange, then to the artist, and a publisher, performing rights organization scenario is different for each one. I paid the $10 to support the crowdfunding campaign to get the infographic. It's this beautiful, colorful poster about this big, and it tells you exactly where everything goes. It's like, shit, I cannot absorb this. I've looked at it so many times. I was like, I know, I'll put it over the toilet at the office. And whenever I take a pee, I can read it. And I've still tried, and I still have no idea what it says. I don't know. Do you guys? I've got a couple of Ryan and Rachel from my office.
It's going to.
I know you're facing the wrong way, Rachel, but we're going to move the poster over at some point, so it's a gender-neutral infographic. But but it's really hard to ingest the information. I really appreciate Ben's point that yes, it's really complex, and that's one thing to note. It's paid differently than before. That's different. That's good to note. Each service is different, so you have to analyze Spotify versus Pandora differently, and not to mention YouTube and iTunes and stuff. And then the bigger question, which I think we can get a little bit more into as we progress in this conversation, is will the billions of clicks and so forth eventually add up enough? The one thing I want to throw in before you respond, Aram, is that it's a moving target too. The other thing is, even if we still had physical sales and there was nothing else out there, if there was no digital, there was no piracy, there's nothing else, we have more musicians than ever creating music, right? And music has more competitors than ever. You know, the availability of videos and games and all that kind of stuff is indirect competition with the attention span for any kind of music as well. So, and the live music scene has changed than it was 20 years ago too. So, even if we were able to get apples and apples, there's still so much other competition that it's such a moving target. So I think that's part of the question too, is how do you know when streaming services have been successful? Is it when they reach the same financial rates as the recording industry generated in the past? Or is it when all artists can make a living? Because I'll tell you right now, that is not going to happen. Streaming services are not going to solve the problem for all artists. But guess what? The recording industry never solved all problems for all artists. So when you hear one artist saying, I don't make enough money from streaming, that artist may not have done any better under the old model. The only difference is more people have access to create music, upload it, get it distributed, aka listed on iTunes. Pandora might not even put you in there because it's curated first, and it takes 20 minutes, is it per track or per album, to actually vet the
Yeah, each track on Pandora is listened to by music analysts, and it's coded by about 450 different musical attributes. A pop song might take 5 minutes to code by some of these really good, nerdy musicologists. Something like an orchestral score might take 20 minutes or 30 minutes.
How about some African percussion?
Some of the guys that do like the West African music are good. They'll do it in closer to 5 minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Aram, I'm sorry, I totally cut you off. Was there something you want to say in response to Ben?
Well, yeah. I mean, you said a lot of what I wanted to say, but let me add on to that. I mean, I think Ben has made a really good point, which is that splitting the hairs between all these different kinds of streaming, ultimately, from an artist's perspective, isn't going to get you anywhere. There's a guy named Jim Griffin who runs, he's worked at Warner Music, he's run his own label, he's a pretty influential music thinker, and he's really fond of saying all you need is a pot of money and a fair way to split it. So ultimately, it comes down to how do we decide what's the most fair way to split the money. The good news is, in terms of economic activity, people generating revenue from interacting with music, this is probably the best that the music industry has ever been doing. Don't believe the hype, don't believe all the downward curves that you've seen the RIAA and its compatriots put out. The reality is that we collectively, as a musical culture, as producers and as consumers and everything in between, are doing more listening, doing more producing, doing more sharing, doing more clicking, doing more communicating, doing more playing, doing more recording than we've ever done in the past. And that collectively, despite the fact that, as Dmitri accurately points out, we have more competition in the sense of video games and iPhone apps and all the other things that you spend your monthly nut on, musical activity in our culture that is revenue generating is at an all-time high. And there's a lot of money coming in through a lot of different windows that didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. The other good news is that artists, in part because of this, have more power with respect to the record labels and the other entrenched companies that they've ever had in the past. The sad reality is, by the RIAA's own tally, more than 90% of recording artists never see a royalty check beyond the initial advance. That's just the sad truth, and that's because of the recoupment clauses and many of the other kinds of shenanigans that go on in traditional record label contracts. So a lot of these independent recording artists that you hear, like David Lowery or Zoe Keating, kind of complaining about, well, I'm only getting half a cent for that and a quarter cent for that, are people who would have been paid zilch, bupkis, nothing under the traditional music industry system. So while they're right to be making a fuss, they deserve a fair piece of the pie. You have to understand what fair means from a holistic standpoint. Now, the bad news, which also has a good element of it, is as Dmitri pointed out, there are more people recording and sharing their music now than ever. I mean, beginning with MySpace 10 years ago, there were 100 million different recording artists online. And no matter how big that pie gets, no matter how much economic activity is generated by people making and listening to music, there's no way to split that amount of money enough so that each of those 100 million recording artists can make a living at it. So we seem to have this cultural expectation that you should be able to make a living as a recording artist. And, you know, I'm a recording artist. I think probably everybody on this panel is up here because we began as a musician and got into the industry out of a love for it and a concern for the future of our art. But there's no way that we can all be rock stars or even what's known as the musical middle class, because that much money does not exist on God's green earth, right? So what we have to do strategically as artists and as the people who help artists to make livings for themselves is to think of streaming as a combination of revenue generation and marketing and promotion, right? And if you think about it, there's nothing new about this. There's a reason that AM/FM radio has never paid royalties to recording artists, right? If you play a song, if you write a song and he records that song and it plays on a Clear Channel station, I get paid, but he doesn't get paid because he's the recording artist. Two different kinds of copyright.
He gets paid on Pandora, though.
He does get paid on Pandora, and that's beginning to change. There's a lot of pressure in Congress to change that for AM/FM as well, and Clear Channel has been actually very proactively making deals to change that, but that's kind of a side note. But the point is that for the last century, we have recognized that streaming music, which was called radio at the time, was actually a very valuable form of promotion for artists in terms of bringing people into concerts, in terms of driving sales of recordings and other kinds of merchandise. And we still need to recognize that that's part of the value that these services have to offer.
All right, slow down here. Whoa.
You must be a professor.
I'm sorry, I do tend to go on at length.
All right.
Thank you for coming up, by the way, with the fourth point which was terrestrial. Which I think of as streaming, even though it's streaming over the air.
Sure.
That's the fourth point.
Okay, so Dick, to summarize the entry comments, the four categories are on demand, which is things like Spotify, where you can actually call up an artist or a song and listen to their music right then. Non-interactive, which is Pandora or webcast, which is basically, in webcast, it's like old radio, but it happens over the internet instead of the airwaves. In the case of Pandora, you can type in the name of a song or an artist, but they're not necessarily going to play you that song or artist. They're going to play you music based on that. So that's non-interactive. Performing rights income, which was so complicated we didn't really describe it, and terrestrial, which means on the over-the-air radio. So anyway, just to make sure your initial point sunk in, that's that. But hold on. This is all lots of information, lots of new information. Any clarifying questions so far? Seriously, let's get to the pace we need to be at so that we actually absorb this information. Any clarifying questions? Yes. Will you go to the mic? I know it's annoying, but we're recording, so it helps. Helps our online audience someday maybe find it on Pandora and listen to your question.
Yeah, I have two questions. By the way, I'm Saskia Laro. I'm a trumpet player. I have a world music band on label for many years. Anyway, the first question is about the music streaming services, where they get their money from. Is it from advertisements? The second question is, I'm from the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, we have many discussions about all these subjects, especially about the publishing, the artist royalty side. We have Buma Stemra fighting, sending bills to people who post their own music on their own websites, and so it's kind of on hold, that discussion, but it remains. How do you get your money as a as as a composer. There is a new website that I just discovered. Maybe it exists already for a long time. Mixcloud. That you can just post everything. Post your sets, your live sets, all the DJs, and they say, yeah, we pay you. You read all the fine lettering. Yeah, we pay artist royalties, but how much? Who's going to get it? It's all a little bit unclear.
So those are awesome questions. They're not really clarifying questions of stuff we've already talked about, but they are awesome questions, so I'm glad you asked them so that we actually answer them. Why don't we jump into those questions? Is yours a clarifying question first? Here, let Jolly get up here and ask his clarifying question. Then we'll come back to those. Those are really good questions.
YouTube is the way that a lot of people listen to music. That would be in category 3.
Performing rights income. Is YouTube performing rights income?
Yes.
Okay. Good clarifying question. That's the kind of question I'm thinking as we're going. Don't hesitate to jump. We'll do lots of interactive Q&A and stuff like that. I still have a bunch of questions I want to ask them. But if you have like, hey, whoa, slow down. I want to know what this means. You said this, or what's this organization, or who's that person? Jump up and do that one. Let's go ahead and answer these before I forget them. And then I want to ask you guys some questions too. The first one is, how do artists get paid? Or
what's the source of the income?
How do streaming services? Yeah. Where do streaming services get money from?
Well, it's a mix of advertising. Certain ones are advertising. Pandora primarily is advertising revenue. Some of the on-demand streaming services are a mix of advertising and subscription revenue.
It's also important to point out, though, that right now, I think none of the major streaming services are actually profitable, which is not an immediate problem because they're all pretty well-funded. Pandora went public and made a lot of money in an IPO, but it's a long-term problem because if these services don't find a way to balance the cost of their content, which is in the range of 60 or 70% of the income that they bring in, with the option to bring in more revenues, they're eventually going to turn belly up, and this cash cow and promotional vehicle is going to disappear for musicians.
If I could just say that I thought Aram brought up a very good point when he was talking about, should everybody be making their living from recordings, and should that be basically the basis of how we answer the question that you asked? Will streaming sustain this industry? That's a very big question. It's a good question. But I also think that before we get to that question, there's just the basic economics of it. And like, will the old pot of money be will the new pot of money be as big as the old pot of money? There's a lot of people who think right now that we're in this weird inflection point and that the lines are crossing right now. And that, the downloads were sort of going up for a decade. They fell last year, and they fell pretty dramatically. Especially the end of the year was terrible for the music industry, and people are just not buying as much music on iTunes, et cetera, as they used to, and that's really caused a lot of stomachs to tighten all throughout the industry, because that's been one of those things that was just assumed to sort of be, pretty steady. And streaming went up by 32% last year in the US. There were 118 billion songs streamed in the United States. 118 billion. It's incredible, and I think it's really amazing for services like Pandora that they have permeated just the culture to the extent that they have. But the amount of money that those 118 billion streams are worth is about 59 million albums. That's according to Nielsen, which just published their annual study. So, Dmitri mentioned the word scale, which is like the buzzword that every technology and streaming service throws around, partly as a kind of defense of just like, okay, well, wait, once we get to scale, everything will be fine, we promise. But we're obviously not there yet. So, the gains have not surpassed the losses.
Well, that's all true in a macro sense, but for the audience in this room, who are mostly independent and small label musicians, that inflection point, I think, provides more buffer than it does for the major labels. When you see those big numbers that Ben was quoting, those are the numbers reported by the recording industry, which is composed primarily of major label stakeholders and who count new music sold over the counter at large retailers primarily. They're getting better at reporting, but it's kind of biased. But the reality is that the independent music distributors, and I'm talking downloads as well as streaming, the CD Babies of the world, the TuneCores of the world, the Bandcamps of the world, are still actually growing in terms of the amount of music that they push. I think collectively, those three companies alone have paid out, have sold more than 2/3 of $1 billion worth of music. Now,
Do they not report to SoundScan?
I'm not sure whether they currently report to SoundScan. I know that they have not historically. Bandcamp does?
And the rest of them, I believe, it's up to the musician artist
Yeah.
to report it.
So, but the second part of that point is that remember that a recording artist on a major label or even on an indie is getting a nominal 12 or 15% royalty rate, which adds up to between 2 and 8% in terms of actual royalties paid to them. Whereas if you're distributing through Bandcamp or CD Baby or TuneCore, you're getting 80, 90, close to 100% of that money. So that $650 million amounts to something like $45 billion worth of major label music sold in terms of how much money is actually ending up in the recording artist's
Aram,
pockets.
can I ask you about that data point? And then
Yeah.
Dick, I want to hear from you as well.
Yeah.
When you say that those three services or services like those ones that are indies going direct to distribution to iTunes and streaming services are growing,
Yes.
are they growing as a result of musician acquisition? Like, are CD Baby, TuneCore, and Bandcamp and so forth growing because more and more musicians are coming to them and that's why they're growing? Or is it an increase in the market for digital music?
Well, I think it's both, and there's a snowball effect where the more musicians that come to them, the more customers come to them, and the more musicians are in turn drawn to them. And you can watch it happening right now with a fairly new service called Kickstarter that many of you have probably heard of. It was only launched about 4 years ago. And I think last year it did close to $100 million worth of support for musical projects. And this is typically when people are asking for money up front before they've actually done the recording. Very famously in 2012, Amanda Palmer raised $1.2 million over the course of a single month from 25,000 different independent supporters who each gave $1 or $2 or $5 to help her in her cause. Not all musical projects on this platform are this spectacular, but this is a number that's basically been doubling every year. The amount of money that people put into musical Kickstarter projects and Indiegogo projects over the past 5 years.
Dick, you work with a lot of artists in this whole sphere to help them figure out how to be visible on the various digital platforms and so forth. What's your perspective on whether this is the opportunity that Aram claims it is for independent artists?
Well, I think I've stored up about 15 different points I want to make in my head, so I'll see if I can get these all out. I'm going to answer your question in a second.
That's fine.
But the very first thing I want to say is, while I agree with a lot of what Aram said, I want to take issue a little bit with your characterization of the major labels as being yes, it's true, they're a driver of the music business, but by many estimates, including by the independent music industry's estimates, the independents are at least 35% of the market. So, sure, 65% would be probably an agreed number, depending on how you slice it and dice it. Is major label focused, but there's a huge piece that isn't. And so, a couple of the points that I wanted to make related to that are the independents. In the past several years, via an organization called Merlin, have been very effective at positioning themselves as a fourth major, if you will, in negotiations. And I do digital licensing for Merge Records, so I'm in a position to be pretty familiar with this. What's missing in the market right now is an artist organization that is, in effect, the fifth major. And there are a variety of different organizations that have started up. I know many of these gentlemen are familiar with Content Creators Coalition, a variety of different Future of Music, a variety of different coalitions that have yet to really coalesce into a marketing entity the same way Sony, Warner, Universal, Merlin on behalf of the independents have been able to do. And that's a huge gap in the market at the moment. It's one of the reasons, I think, why artists have been less successful at claiming their piece of the pie, if you will. Now, going past that, I want to go to one of the things that Ben said. He made a point about an inflection point, and I was going to say something similar to it, which you'll recognize from being on the same mailing group list that I'm on. But Jim Griffin has talked for years about the idea of swinging from vine to vine in a jungle. And it's really clear to me, if you think about the way you swing on a vine, you start out slow and you speed up. So all of us, I think, on the panel have been in this business long enough to have seen the vine start swinging very slowly, which happened maybe in the late 90s. It gathered speed in the early 2000s, and with the development of, or with the announcement of iTunes as a digital music source for downloading, income was lost on the sales side of CDs, but it was gained on the digital side, and it hurt less at that point. And there goes my phone ringing, so let me turn that off. What's happening now, I think, is there's an acceleration, and it's driven by technology. It's driven by the fact that technology is starting to catch up with what people want to do, but it's not there yet. So, the industry, for all intents and purposes, is about 16 years old for digital music. And that goes back right almost to the start of it. So at this point, we have business models that are still being figured out. We have technology that does a decent job in many cases of allowing you to access your digital music, but hasn't really become household adopted. I can give a specific example of this. Finally, after, 6 or 7 years worth of fiddling around with trying to stream digital music at my house, I broke down and I bought a Sonos. So, and then I don't work for Sonos. This isn't an ad for Sonos. But what I got out of that is all of a sudden, I thought, okay, this solves something, because at home I used to listen really exclusively to downloaded music. Now all of a sudden, I get how I can use Sonos to listen to Pandora, and my listening in the house is probably switched from 90% downloaded music to 90% streamed.
Sonos is a
SoundCloud.
system that you can, there's a couple ways to use it, but basically you can either plug it into your stereo and then you have access from any device, phone, tablet, computer, to tons of different streaming services. You can do Spotify, Pandora, Songza. You could connect it to a
SoundCloud,
a drive that you store underneath the couch that has your entire iTunes library on it, and everybody in the house that has a device can make playlists, and you can make playlists from multiple services. And so you can either buy it as a standalone speaker or you can plug it into your stereo. Sounds like, oh, well, that's kind of cool. That's a cool little novelty. But
It's
it
not-
actually
it's not, though.
totally changes your listening habits.
Totally changes listening. And the last thing I want to say, I don't want to hog the mic, but technology like this, not just this, but like this, and user interfaces that are closer to how you actually consume music are just getting to the adoption point. Meanwhile, people are buying less music, and in my opinion, it is disproportionately hitting the middle class of musicians who are sort of waiting for the revenues on the streaming end to catch up with where they're at. That's my opinion. And I think it's very much a function of the interface and of changing consumer behavior and expectations and willingness to pay for music consumed in a different way. I look at 10 years ago, I would never come close to paying what I pay now for cable TV or for digital TV. I paid, $30. Now, I count myself fortunate, but I pay 4 times that. And I don't think there are a lot of people who've gotten away from that model. I'm still in it. But that's a good example of how behavior is changing, but it has not caught up with how fast the rope is swinging at this point. And that's why we're in all these discussions.
Let me just clarify. You're saying the middle class musicians, or not the super big pot stars and not the really small developing bands, are suffering the most from the vine not swinging fast enough in the digital sphere. That's your vibe on that.
In my opinion.
And where is the middle? Like, how do you define the middle?
The artist with 10,000 fans.
The artist with 10,000 fans. Okay.
That's the metric that's used in the all over the press.
I want to state for
if
this.
You have 10,000 fans, you can make a living as a musician.
In the world music world, unfortunately, 10,000 fans is on the high end of things for the most part.
So fair enough.
I wanted to touch on that because I think we've been talking a lot about the industry at large, which is critical and important, but the world music niche industry operates a little differently, as you all know, and there are certain things about the world music community that were different. Talking about the Vine, and the world music community, probably the death of Tower Records affected the world music community more than the pop industry, and they had a lot more to lose with the death of the traditional music industry. As much as the other genres cry poverty, I think that we've seen in world music and in classical and jazz too, how poor it got much faster. And on the other side of the coin, I think these niche genres have a lot more to gain when this technology reaches scale. Because you don't have to wait for a major distributor or another distributor to reach these people. You can do that yourself with services like Pandora and some of the other services we talked about.
Well, I think I'm glad that you brought that up.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
My name is Jacob Edgar, and I run a record label called Kumbansha and do a bunch of other things. And I've been working in the quote-unquote world music industry for a long time, and I think what you said is really true, and I wanted to bring it up, that everything you're talking about relates to broader music industry trends, but the world music industry is very particular, both in how we market and promote, distribute our music, how consumers find it, discover it, enjoy it. And I think that there are some problems with the technology from Pandora to Spotify that have not replaced traditional, as you said, Tower Records type stores. Speaking particularly about Pandora, a big frustration of mine with Pandora has been that it's very similar to, I would call it like a Clear Channel type radio station. It's very focused on mainstream music. If you're interested in niche genres, world music, I find Pandora to be pretty useless. And even in my case, just take a particular situation with the artists on my record label, my biggest selling artist, an artist who sells out 2 shows at Town Hall at the last APAP, is not on Pandora and hasn't been on Pandora despite regular requests to have him on Pandora. He's somebody who has 100,000 likes on Facebook. So because he doesn't fit into the parameters of Pandora's curated selection process, he hasn't been able to access that revenue stream. And I think that's probably the case with a lot of artists who fall outside of definable genre boundaries and can't be categorized by, whatever the musicologists are that are working at Pandora. I think the same issue comes up with Spotify as well. Spotify, I've always been impressed, and I'm a regular user of Spotify. I actually love it. And I'm amazingly impressed with what is on Spotify. But, as one of these uber world music people, I'm also depressed with how little is on Spotify, and how much is not on Spotify. How many parts of the world that produce amazing music that people would want to hear don't even know Spotify exists, consume their music in other ways. There's a lot of countries that haven't adopted streaming models, and therefore they're not aware of putting their music into those cycles. I hope at some point that'll change, but if you go to Africa, there are places still listening to music on cassettes.
Sounds like a music opportunity for you.
Yeah, I've thought about it, actually. And another that brings me to another subject, just to talk about technology and change. This is something that's been happening in the music industry since the music industry existed, and probably before. I mean, I work with a musician who's in his 80s, and he told me that when radio came along, he lost all of his work. He used to be a live musician, playing in local bars and roaming from house to house, and when the radio came along, he stopped performing and didn't perform again until the CD industry started. So I think we're seeing transitions, but ultimately, as you've said, the question is, who's making the money? how do we bring attention to the music that we're interested in, get people to have access to it and discover it on these services or whatever other services develop. And also keep in mind, as you mentioned before, that a lot of these services like Spotify and Pandora, they're making their money from investors, not from the revenue streams that you've described. So if they go out of business tomorrow, there'll still be some pretty rich people coming out of those companies.
Not that many.
What's that?
Not that many.
Not that many are making that kind of money, you mean?
Yeah, these guys run pretty tight ships. I mean, look, I know the Pandora guys, I know the Spotify guys. There's, 5 people who became millionaires because of these companies, but most of the people are just working stiffs. I have friends who sit, in their house coding songs for Pandora all day, and they pull down $50,000, $60,000 a year. They're not getting rich.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back and address what you said because that's very fair. But I think what he's referring to is the content costs, the acquisition costs are quite high, higher than I think that most people realize, and that leads. Revenue doesn't necessarily mean profitability when you have a lot to pay for on the other end. But as far as
right, but I'm not talking about revenue. I'm talking about investment money that's come in from the investors who put in millions of dollars into these companies. For a stake.
With respect, I mean, I think that you are falling prey a little bit to propaganda that's been spread about these companies. I mean, realistically, if you want to look at music industry organizations, the broadcasters and the major labels are much more top-heavy and have been for decades than any of these digital music companies are, right? I mean, Tim Westergren, who started Pandora, went without pay for like 5 years while he was getting the company off the ground. Not because he had a bunch of money sitting around from investors or an inheritance or anything else, but because he loved the project. By the way, I have no relationship to Pandora whatsoever other than just admiring their product and their vision. So
I think Tim's doing quite well, but now, by the way.
Now he's doing great, but he put in the time, right? He put in a lot.
Well,
I
musicians
don't know
would
many
argue
people
that
who
they
would
do,
have
and
stuck
record
through it the
labels
way
would
that he
argue
did.
that they do. So I mean, everybody puts in the time.
Yeah, I mean, Tim is the equivalent of a rock star in the Silicon Valley world. So, as far as the world music not catching up to the rest of it, I mean, you're absolutely right about that. And I think what Dick said about this business being about 16 years old, I think it wasn't until the late 70s that you could even really buy West African music in record stores in the States.
Right.
So I think that's a pretty cognizant and real analogy. As far as Pandora goes, it is a very specific genre by genre genome. Some of the genomes we don't have yet. We don't have genomes for non-12 tone scales or music. We don't have some Arab musics because there's not really the demand for it yet. But it's growing, and let's talk after this because we can do something about some of the submissions that you haven't been able to get into Pandora.
Great.
Can I make one other point that's related to that, which is that the advent of digital music and streaming music in particular has, and again, I don't think this is really caught up with where it will go, but say you're a metal fan. Chances are you focused on metal music, and that's what you spent most of your income on. But now you have the opportunity, which you did not have before, to consume a lot more music, to go much further afield if you choose to do so, and a lot of those individuals will. They haven't all done it yet, but I think that's one of the reasons why the digital services are optimistic about their, and why they make the argument that, sure, it takes 2,000 individual streams to, well, that number isn't right actually, but let's say it takes, maybe let's say 160 streams to equal the income from the sale of one digital download. But if you extrapolate that over the ability of that metal consumer to get interested in world music, happen. And not only might it happen, it will happen. As the tools get better at presenting music, different kinds of music, oh, you're interested in this? Why don't you try this? It's already happening on Spotify. And it happens on Pandora as part of the music genome. Personally, I think you guys could do even more in that area. I think you could focus on channels that go even further afield.
Or having a
lot-
slider where you could choose how eclectic suggestions you want. I want my stuff core
how wild
suggestions,
you
or I
want
want
it
them
to be.
super eclectic.
That's a
Yeah.
philosophical discussion and thought, and believe me, that's taken very seriously at Pandora. And Pandora's mission is radio, so it's finding the right mix of familiarity in your music with sprinkled with some diversity, and that's a debate that we all have.
Ben, you wanted to say something in there.
Well, I'm just reminded of something that someone I know who owns an independent label and has nothing to do with world music, but he told me maybe 5 years ago when a lot of this stuff started to take off that, when we sort of went into the iTunes age, there was the unbundling of albums. You okay?
Wrong pipe.
No, I'm just feeling so emotional.
Like, one of the major problems that the music industry has had is the unbundling of the album, where instead of spending $15 for the whole CD, you spent 99 cents for the one song you wanted. And it's great for consumers, but it threw things upside down for the music industry. But this guy said that going into the streaming age is going to be even more of a disruption than that, and it's because it's going to annihilate the whole benefit of so-called breakage, of the idea that people will be paying for something that they're not actually going to use. Where you used to spend $15 for the CD, listen to one or two songs, whatever, but you got $15 out of them for it. Then they spent 99 cents for that one song, but you still got the 99 cents. And then when we get into the age of Spotify and Pandora, etc., it comes down to how many times they actually listen to the song. And if they spent 99 cents and they only listened to the song twice, you still got the 99 cents. But if they stream it twice, each one of those streams might only be worth half a cent. So I think for anybody, whether you're independent or whether you're on a major label or whatever, if you're at a stage where you're not realistically going to have a mega hit that might be clicked on 100 million times, this is a really big consideration for you. And I think that it should be a consideration about whether you want to play ball in this area at all, because what it means is that if you don't think that people are going to listen repeatedly to your music, every song on the album, 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, whatever, it will pay you less money than the download.
I want to acknowledge that you're waiting to ask some questions. It's probably going to be another 5-10 minutes before I take another question, just because some of the stuff that I've put up here, I've been waiting a year to ask. So if you want to, I'm going to call on you next, but it's probably going to be about 10 minutes. So we're calling on her next, everybody, okay? But just hang out. A couple of things. One, the Pandora conversation is actually one that I've been waiting a year to have, in a way, because that same dude, Jacob from Kumbacha, made a very similar comment a year ago. And I just want to, I was really excited that you agreed to come here so that maybe this conversation might get a little further in for this community. So it's awesome that you're here and willing to engage, and that you said, hey, Jacob, talk to me afterwards. Let's work out how this could work. But what I want to say, like on a macro scale, is a couple things. One is it takes time, right? There's this assumption that if you're out there in internet land and you're seeing like, oh shit, they just made millions of dollars in this stock offering, and this dude's making crazy bucks and whatever, and you're like, well shit, I go to this particular neighborhood in this one city in this one country in Africa, and I know how people live, and there's a couple of musicians who just might have a touring career somehow someday if I could just record them. If I could just market that right, if I could find that world music audience in America, I could get them on tour and so forth. So you've got one lens where you're like, holy shit, this is the real deal right here. And then you have this other lens where you're on the internet and you're like, damn, these people are pulling crazy money, and here I am trying to help this dude just feed his family, or something like that. And you see there's this disconnect between those two realities, that somebody like Jacob, who does both of those things, who's like, okay, how do I get this on the streaming service? Oh, how the hell am I going to get there to record this, You've got this crazy bridge that's huge that he's trying to build, and a lot of the people in this room are trying to build either with their own music or other people's music. But the thing that I think that if you're not in the technology sphere, that's hard to recognize, is that there are steps in the process, that this is new infrastructure and it's taking time. That doesn't mean wait forever or anything, but we're talking years here. Everyone thought, well, when Amazon came along, wow, the internet age is here. You know what I mean? Or when iTunes came along, the internet age is here. But they're talking about same-day delivery coming up soon for your packages. You order it online in the morning, it's on your doorstep the same day. How do you get that physical good, that new blender or whatever, those crazy pants or whatever it is? How do you get them the same day? Because you know you need the crazy pants the same day, right?
You bought them all. They're sold out.
How many crazy pants do you own? I've never seen you wear the same pair of pants twice.
Anyway, the point is that these technological things seem like they're light of speed because you clicked on it and it played or whatever, but the actual process not only takes time, it also takes relationships. Like we're thinking about this stuff of, I submitted it online. Why the hell isn't it there? I already put it on CD Baby or whatever. Why isn't it on Pandora, or whatever? But there's also relationships, and even in the non-curated world, there's curation happening, and there always will be, is what I think.
There's another point that should be made here, which is that in the olden days, as my kids would describe, the era that I come from, which is I don't think myself is right exactly like 10 years ago. The artist had a much easier route to market, and not only that. Sort of, if you followed these steps, you found a place to distribute your music, which not to say that that's an easy step, but okay. So you found a way to distribute your music. Once it got out of your hands, it's largely taken care of, and your responsibility, if you were a touring musician, probably largely revolved around, okay, I get to a town, I go to the record store, I do an in-store, maybe I go to the radio station. It's a very easily understood set of requirements on you, the artist. That coupled with what the business itself was doing would sell your music for you. Chances are, if your music was good. So that's changed a lot, and it's changed for a couple different reasons. First of all, if you look at the model of how music is paid for, how streaming music is paid for, almost all the models are commoditized. What I mean by that is you look at the gross revenue that's pulled in by a particular service, whoever it is, and you distribute it on a pro rata basis. That means I don't care if you're a world music consumer. If you get 10 streams and somebody else gets 1 million streams, you're both going to be paid the same rate. So what that means is everybody in this room, to get into the streaming music world, you have to, and to make it work for you, you have to find a way to participate much more actively than you ever have before. And without that, it's going to be a long, slow grind. And I think that's reality, because you're being paid the same amount. You might be streaming proportionately, a large proportionate less than somebody else who can, several million streams monetized at a half or 3/4 cent. A stream is still a good pot of money, but 10 streams isn't. So you need to do everything that you can, and there's a lot that you can do on every streaming service, on Pandora, on Spotify, to build your audience in a way that you never had to do before. Creating playlists. You need to take, as an artist, or whoever your representative is, an active role in building your presence. And if you don't, you're going to get what's handed to you.
And sort of tagged onto that, even if you're not at that step yet where you're going to engage at that level, you have to consume it the way that it's being delivered in order to understand how other people are consuming it. If you're not using Pandora and Spotify and other services, you won't be able to market to the people that are there, that are generating revenue there. If you're not looking at how people are using YouTube to deliver great content, you're not going to be able to create it yourself because you won't understand how it works. There's this idea that I've heard pushed out there in the DIY music sphere, which is that every year or two there's a new hotspot where musicians and fans interact and gather. 1 year it was Kickstarter. And so if you knew how to learn Kickstarter fast enough, quick enough, and generate revenue there in that moment, then you're good to go. Then the next year it was YouTube. And so then you had to learn how to do that and so forth. But if you're not actually like scanning the radar and you're more like, well, this technology stuff is beyond me, then you're not even going to be probably going to be able to enter the game at all, which I think is kind of the sort of like the baby step before we're doing what Dick's talking about, where you're actually managing your digital presence and so forth. And that is a great segue, because I want to ask you, Drew, what can the people in this room, musicians or labels do to increase their chances of being on Pandora, knowing they're a world music scene? And then if they're already on Pandora, what can they do to increase their chances of increasing their revenue stream from Pandora?
Submit.pandora.com. And that goes directly to our curation team, and they're the gatekeepers to the analysts who will get it live. As I said, some forms of world music we don't have genomes for, but I think most that we do, I think most that would have any kind of audience in the West, we would. Once you're on Pandora, it's important to sign up for SoundExchange. SoundExchange is the body that collects performance royalties, and I'm going to hand it over to Dick so you can tell a little more about SoundExchange as a former board member.
So this goes back to the four potential revenue areas, of which the fourth one, terrestrial, isn't really a revenue area right now. The hope is that it will be in the future. But of the three revenue areas, collecting money from companies like Pandora, non-interactive radio, is done through SoundExchange, an organization called SoundExchange. They collect and distribute monies. At the following scale. So 50% of collections go to the copyright owner, 50% go to the sound recording owner, and of that 50% that goes to the sound recording owner, 5% go to the session musicians or performing musicians. So if you haven't signed up for SoundExchange, it doesn't matter who you are in this room. If you haven't signed up for SoundExchange, you're not even set up to play the game, if you think of it as a game. Or you're not even set up to collect revenue, assuming there's revenue for you there to collect, and there will be. There may not be right now, but there will be. But if you haven't taken that step, it's hard for you to be part of the discussion. And I think everybody in here should be part of the discussion. So.
There are world music artists who literally got checks for $1,000 or more once they signed up for SoundExchange. So,
this is the performer side, not the publishing side. It's and this is a pretty remarkable thing, that online only, and through also satellite radio, I think, right?
Yeah.
SoundExchange deals with paying the performers on the recording. Mm-hmm. Just if anybody gets as confused as I do about this crap, that's.
If those of you standing up and are tired in the back, there's a bunch of seats in front. Feel free to come and rest yourself. We'd glad to have you part of the conversation, so feel free to do that. Hey, Ben.
Hey.
I drank all the water. Can you pass that pitcher down? Thanks. I like the fact that you're an independent source. You're not promoting anybody or promoting anything other than ideas and going through all this stuff. What's your vibe? Like, if you were an artist, if you were a world music artist, let's say, today, what would be your perspective on this whole streaming thing? Is it going to help your career, or do you think it's something that will help now, or do you think it's something that will help in the future? And if it's in the future, what's going to happen to make that happen? How long is it going to take? From all the reading and interviews and analysis that you've done, what is it?
I think it's not just world music artists, but I think like a lot of kind of artists, I would probably be pretty scared at the moment about just, where my money at, like things are very upside down. But I think the big question is just like, what's going to happen in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Because things really are changing very, very fast at the moment. And one of the big questions, this lady here asked, earlier, like, where does money come from these services? Is it advertising? Is it subscription? Is it what? That's one of the big questions of just, are people going to be satisfied with advertising supported models? And are businesses going to be able to survive on the money from the advertising? Or do the businesses need subscription, which generally kick in a lot more money? And then the question is, are people out there really going to be willing to fork over their $10 a month for Spotify and for Rhapsody and Beats and whatever? I think that's the most frightening question in the music industry right now is, people are very happy to check out streaming music when it's free. But they're reluctant to pay money for it.
That's true, although that is changing a bit. I mean, there were about 10 years during which there was a sum total of maybe 2 million people paying for subscriptions around the world. Since Spotify came to the US 3-4 years ago, it's gone from 2 million to 6 million to now a rumored 10 million people paying for subscriptions. Pandora last year, they had been middling out at like a million subscribers, even less, I think 700,000 subscribers or something. They put a cap on the amount of free listening that you could do on your phone and instantly signed up another 1.5 million subscribers or so in the course of a quarter or two. So there is
Although
actually
that's gone now.
Well, now it's a constantly changing strategy.
Wait, the cap's gone. The subscribers are gone too.
No, not
The
the,
cap-
subscribers stuck
well,
around.
The cap is
I'll let
gone.
you talk about it.
Yeah, there was a mobile cap that
Yeah.
talking about acquisition costs. The royalty rate for Pandora gets really expensive, so we had to cap on 40 hours how much music you could listen to on a mobile device, and if you wanted to keep listening, you could upgrade to the Pandora One subscription. And as you said, about 1.5 million people did that in the 3-month period where we had it. And then once we released
And they stuck around?
Once we released the cap, the vast majority of them stuck around. There was very little churn on that.
Do you guys lose money every time somebody who's only using the ad-generated service streams a song? Every single time somebody streams a song and they're not a subscriber, do you lose money?
It doesn't really work that song per song basis because it really the revenue has more to do with how many dollars you generate per hour and the CPM or the rate that we can charge for each click or each ad changes. So the answer is no. We don't lose money every time someone streams a song, but the net benefit of a year is that it's really close, but Pandora is yet to really turn a profit.
But when people subscribe, is it more profitable than ad revenue?
No. When people subscribe, Pandora
Dude
actually
is
loses
shaking his
money.
head when you're saying yes and nodding his head when you're saying
I've
no.
looked at your financials really closely for a number of years, and you guys have your RPM is much higher for subscribers than for non-subscribers.
That's news to me.
Okay.
The other point to make
I
about
don't believe that's true, but we can clarify that afterwards.
Well,
They
they're a
also
public
pay
company.
a higher royalty when somebody subscribes.
the royalty rate's higher.
That's true.
Even though we're getting that actual income, the royalty rate is higher.
So if you're the kind of musician that has fans who subscribe, you can get paid more than if you're the kind of musician whose fans are using the ad-supported service.
I don't know how the royalty breaks down at that nuanced level.
I mean,
Okay.
Pandora's finances are actually pretty simple in the big picture. That they make a bunch of money on advertising, they have to pay out a bunch of money on royalties, and
Yeah, there's like little nuances and how you can swing those either way, but generally that's the case.
But the other thing that needs to be considered is that for most of the services that are generating serious money now, well, really just for most of the services, they've all been operating in a down economy. If 2007 was the great smash. The second great smash, at least that we've all been part of, 2001 being the first one. 2007 was the one that hit the economy. And in that period, Pandora and everybody else are trying to sell ads. So there's an interesting paper that just got published, you can look it up, by a guy named Will Page, who's the chief economist at Spotify. It's up on the web, and it talks about this.
You guys all have chief economists at your companies, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Who doesn't have a chief economist?
Will Page is a
he's
very
doing
smart
some
dude.
really interesting work.
he is.
That guy, and this is a really good point that in a really down global market, they've been selling ads, and I'm sure this applies to Pandora too. And what's going to happen when the market moves up again?
Hasn't it?
My
Hasn't it
guess
moved
is
up?
that it's going to affect the CPMs. It's going to affect a lot of things. That a lot more revenue will be on the table or potentially able to be generated.
I think it's very easy to see that as a propaganda move by Spotify.
Do you think it is?
I mean, it's the
their economist,
It's
though.
the economist for Spotify issuing a report saying, "Hey, we're doing great in a down economy." I mean, what would you think if that was, an executive at another company?
Who? An economist in another company?
That's a company officially sort of saying, "Hey, it doesn't look like we're making a lot of money, but we're working in a down economy. We're doing the best we can."
That's true, but
That's not really.
I mean,
what
the
he said in
market went up
article, though.
33% last year.
But Will Page's credentials kind of carry a little bit of an aura. He used to be the chief economist for the major collection society in the UK. So he's a bit more of an independent. He's not a flag.
Will is a very legitimate economist. I'm just saying, grain of salt.
For sure.
I feel like I need to. I told you could ask that question, so why don't you ask that question? We'll get some more interaction going for a bit before I steal the mic again.
How about the role of the aggregators? Perhaps, you know what I'm talking about?
What's the question about the
The aggregators?
What about the role? What's the question? Like, do they get you on streaming services?
No, maybe to him as a kind of fifth major. And also for the gentleman that was talking before me, how to get his artists digital up, because if you go through an aggregator, you have more chance and they collect all the money for you. It's quite easy.
Okay, so an aggregator, if you don't know, is another word for a kind of distributor. A lot of distributors don't like to be called aggregators because it implies that they're just getting a bunch of stuff and pushing it through the digital marketplace. But it's a commonly used term for the CD Babies and the TuneCores of the world and so forth, and the Orchard as well. But her question, I think, is directed at you, Dick. Could the aggregators act as that fifth major or fourth major, however majors are left or whatever, as both an advocate and also for marketing purposes? It sounds like you're saying.
They could. Some of the aggregators are not focused on individual artists. Some are. CD Baby is. TuneCore. Well, what do you mean by that? The point I'm trying to make is that CD Baby does pursue the business of individual artists. They do pursue that. So in that sense, they're
As opposed to a record label.
Yeah, as opposed to an aggregator like, sorry for using that term,
like the
an
Orchard.
aggregator like the Orchard, which is focused on larger catalogs, which is focused on label catalogs. CD Baby is focused on individual artists in the same way that TuneCore is focused on individual artists. Their business model is much more tied to individual
You can have a
artists.
record label on CD Baby or TuneCore. You can.
Yeah.
But their main market is oriented towards independent artists, whereas somebody like The Orchard, their main market is, we only put you in here if you have, 20 titles or something per year or something like that. That's the distinction
CD
that he's
Baby
making.
pursues the business of individual artists in a way that The Orchard does not pursue the business of individual artists. Unless you're to a certain size, in which case they will.
I started out with IOTA.
Okay.
Can you go on the mic, please?
I started out with IOTA, and then suddenly they were the Orchard.
Yeah.
So maybe that's the reason why I am with them. But I carefully compared CD Baby towards IOTA at the time, and CD Baby gave me less royalties and less connections with other. They had less customers, or how do you call it? Streaming companies, because now with Orchard I collect a very broad range, and with CD Baby it was a smaller range and it was more expensive.
The thinking on that, I'm surprised to hear it was more expensive. I actually would have thought it would be the other way around. As I understand it, CD Baby has a lower distribution fee than IOTA did. Maybe you have a different experience.
15%.
I
50?
understood that CD
15.
Babies was 9%.
Oh yeah, it's 9%
Yeah.
and possible. Yeah, 9% now.
But in any case,
Not IOTA itself, 15%, just iTunes royalties, for example, or Amazon or YouTube or whatever. They collect all the streaming.
well, yeah, but CD Baby and IOTA are going to have very similar. They
IOTA
may not have
doesn't
exactly the same deal, but they're going to have similar collection rate. What they collect from iTunes or what they collect from Spotify or whoever the digital service is going to be very similar. It might not be the same, but it'll be similar. It will be, let's say, from iTunes, let's say it would very likely be 70% of revenues.
Or if you want to keep 100% and just pay a small annual fee, you can go with TuneCore. I mean, there are many
Maybe I'm
different
misunderstanding
flavors.
the question.
Yeah.
Am I misunderstanding it?
No, well, I thought the initial question was whether they could act as a fifth major. Was the original
Yeah,
question?
And I think the answer to that is the ones that are focused on individual artists could act as a fifth major on behalf of their members. Absolutely, there's no reason that they couldn't, and it's very possible that they will.
And actually, my comment before about relationships comes into play with even a company where you go onto their website and upload your music and ask them to distribute your music. You can also have relationships with those companies by telling them when you're touring and telling them when you're doing a PR campaign and telling them when you get certain types of bumps in the fan base or the media or whatever else. They want to sell more of your stuff too. And even though they can't do retail positioning for every independent artist that they distribute, they can sometimes do a little bit of that for artists that have a good reason, but you have to have a good reason, and so you're making a case. You think that you're being distributed, so you're being taken care of, but the truth is you have to do internal advocacy for yourself in those situations as well. Most of those companies do have relationships with Pandora and Spotify and iTunes and other places, but they have to have a reason to spend their time and energy on it. But we're going to have to move on to another. You see those three people behind you, and you've
Let me make one quick point to add on to that too, which is we've kind of been dancing around this, but one of the other benefits of all these streaming services is that unlike traditional retail and radio, you can actually find out on a granular basis who is listening to your music, who's buying it, where they live, what else they like. You can go on to Pandora and see who's added your band to their station, and you can communicate with those people. CD Baby sends you the mailing address of anybody who bought a CD from you, right? So, plus there are these third-party services like Next Big Sound and Music Metric that go out and they look at P2P and they look at Twitter and they look at Facebook and they aggregate all the information about who your audiences are. And people are actually planning tours and planning marketing and distribution campaigns based on the kind of data they're getting from social media.
I think that's an important point. Just we've gotten really into the weeds about the dollars and the cents and the tenths of cents about it all. But one of the really important things about just all of these changes that are happening in the industry and the technology is, there really is a much more of a transparency than there ever used to be about how it actually works, and there's more information, and that can be very valuable information.
Before we move to the next question, I want to ask you, Drew, your title is Director of Artist Partnerships.
Yeah, Manager of Artist
Manager of
Partnerships.
Artist. What does that mean, and how does it relate to the people in the room here?
The team that I'm on is the liaison between Pandora and the traditional music industry, and our job is to use Pandora's data and leverage that as a marketing platform for artists. So that includes doing a lot of the things that you would expect from a traditional music platform. We premiere albums a week before Street. We produce a lot of concerts and events. We have concert series where we do festival initiatives, things of the like.
Have you ever done, say, a world music album with any of those premieres?
We started the premiere program in May, and I don't remember.
Do you think there's an opportunity there, or is it?
I do.
Considered?
Yeah.
Watch that iPad.
Yeah, I do. I think there's an opportunity there.
It's all good.
All right. Okay.
Hi, I have a question for Drew Thurlow. How will we increase the demand for Arab music? And even places like NPR, which on Morning Edition will play button music, they keep playing the same 3 cuts from Marcel Khalifa. And as friends have noticed, there are hundreds of CDs of oud music out there.
Yeah.
And I feel there is a big demand. But again, you might have to expose the audience to it for a while before their ears adjust to this music. But
It's a tough place to be in when NPR is getting criticized for their programming.
Which is pretty diverse.
Yeah, but yeah, I think you're right. I think even in the context of that artistically minded station, there's still room for variety. I think Pandora's getting there. A lot of the holdback is that Pandora's not available in some of these places where this indigenous music exists. So the demand for it isn't quite there enough to exist to put the engineering resources into it.
what about in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The engineering resources it would take to develop that kind of genome are quite large. The overhead is quite large, and we'll definitely get there someday.
When exactly? Or roughly even? 5 years from now, you think?
Get me a DeLorean and I'll tell you.
What's that?
Get me a DeLorean. I'll tell you. I think I think we're working on it. I don't know. But as we've been saying, this whole technology is really new. And just like it took 30 or 40 years for this kind of records to even be available in scale in the States, I think that we're seeing the same thing on the digital side.
How many musicologists does Pandora employ?
Right now it's 25.
Okay, so you have 25 people who sit and actually listen to records, correct?
That's right.
So the process is they sit and listen to a record. This is in comparison to a service like Spotify, who uses a product called Echo Nest to provide their music recommendations. So that's a machine-driven process in comparison to Pandora, which is a person-driven. And it's one of the reasons why you're completely legitimate. It's completely fair of you to say that it's an
evolving
time-consuming
process. I can tell you the first song that went into the genome was ABBA's Dancing Queen, and we've gotten progressively better since then, and it continues.
I have a question about the genome project and all of this. So if what's holding Pandora back from having, say, Arab music in it, is the genome, meaning your sort of design of how you understand and interpret music. Do you have any idea there of sort of what your blank spot is? Like what music out there does not fit into the genome?
That's a good question, and I think that if you think of Pandora as radio, which it's designed to be, there are certain things that the company's made a strategic decision not to pursue until later on down the road, and that includes things like sports or talk, or we launched comedy in 2011. That took a long time. I think the short answer is that to hire on an oud music expert and build a genome and tweak it and A/B it and focus group it and get that catalog up and running is a larger cost than I think Pandora right now feels like it can handle.
Also, just to address the elephant in the room, we're 5 white guys, more or less. This is what the digital music industry looks like. We're not culturally balanced as a sector. This is a representative sample, more or less, that you're looking at. My wife over here, who's dying to speak, an African-American woman who happens to be a great singer also, is very frustrated with Pandora, which she loves, that when she makes an Erykah Badu station, she gets Mary J. Blige, which, according to somebody who maybe doesn't kind of come from the same place culturally, they seem like connected musicians, but to somebody who has a greater degree of expertise in that particular genre, they're worlds apart. So I think that that challenge really is, as Drew was saying, an engineering challenge, and ultimately engineering means human labor. This is the beauty and the weakness of their service is that it relies on human minds to parse information rather than brute machine force. And you need to have an economy that's going to justify the investment in those human minds to bring those kinds of expertise to bear. And so there's a bit of a chicken and egg scenario here.
And not every non-interactive service does it the same way Pandora does. Pandora is popular, I think, partly because it has the music genome. Because there's I don't want to say this the wrong way or make the point come across the wrong way, but there's a quality level to the music.
Of the recommendations, you mean?
It's a really complicated.
That's presented that, for instance, my wife really likes. That's why she likes Pandora. And there are plenty of other stations that are
Is she like Mary Blige?
non-specific about what music they will bring in. They're happy to work, for instance, with an aggregator and bring in all music from everybody, whether it's great or whether it's horrible. And it runs the gamut. But it's all there. And the question is just whether some models are going to be better at presenting that than other models. Pandora's isn't particularly effective at going.
It's a consciously curated collection, and that's by design.
Consciously curated.
Well, I mean, Aram, I think part of your point is that there might be some cultural filters and lenses that influence how the music is getting coded or whether it is even getting coded and ingested.
Without question. And it's not nefarious. It's simple, basic economics, right? I mean, here's a company based in Oakland that's reaching for has shareholders to answer to. They're reaching for the lowest hanging fruit. They're not going to bring on a
So wait,
musicologist.
that's two separate things, though. One is about a human filter, right? And making choices based on that. The other one is about economic resources and demand, though, right?
Right, but the human filters are a form of capital that they have to invest in.
It takes considerable resources for Pandora to start a new project, and especially in the light that the company's yet to turn a profit. So taking on the initiative isn't something that can be done lightly. And as I said, Pandora will get there, but unfortunately today it's not there yet.
Is there anything that could be done in the world music sphere as it relates to Pandora until then?
Keep making really good music, and that way we have no choice but to ingest it.
Okay, we got more going here. What's your name?
Jeremy. I play with Tipsy Oxcart. We're a Balkan band. And I have a follow-up question for Ben, actually. Earlier you said you're basically warning musicians that unless your song is a mega hit that's going to get 10,000 clicks on a streaming service, it might not be the best idea to stream it. I was wondering how that relationship differs between interactive streaming services and non-interactive streaming services.
So the question is, if you don't have a ton of fans, should you maybe choose a Pandora, which is a non-interactive streaming service, over a Spotify or vice versa based on that? Like, are the economics different enough from one to the other that it would matter more even if you don't have a huge fan base?
Yeah, that's
well, here's the thing is the choice is kind of not up to you. I mean, it's not your choice about whether to be on Pandora. It's Pandora's choice. You can submit your music, but ultimately, as they said, they're going to decide what goes on there, just like any radio station. But the interactive ones, the Spotify and so forth, they need to actually, negotiate with you or whoever your label or distributor is to get a license to play it. So, whatever your, your relationship is with a label or something, that's where you can make a decision. But I don't believe. You have a compulsory license where you can play whatever you want.
Pandora exists under a federally statutory license, which means we can play any music by anyone. We can play the Beatles. We can play Led Zeppelin. The on-demand services don't operate under a stat license. They have to make direct deals with the content holders, and as such, some of them have opted out and are not available.
But I just want to say, so I guess I did warn, but my goal was just to sort of say that you should be aware of the way this works, and that you do have some choices you can make. You can decide that you do not want to be on Spotify, and if you're on certain kind of labels, then they'll grant your wish. But you have some choices available to you. Others you don't. Okay. I don't know if that helps you.
Yeah, Karin Stein with Los Llaneros Calle Sur, the General Artes Latinas Consortium. I would like to pose a clarifying question. You said, I think it was Dmitri, if you're not on SoundExchange, you can't even put your foot in the door. Can you specify the relationship? Because I signed up for SoundExchange several years ago when some of my compositions were put in a documentary that was broadcast on CNN, and I saw checks coming in from SoundExchange that diminished over time. I guess with time that particular documentary was streamed less and less frequently. But at the same time, CD Baby kept sending trickles to my bank account for the same songs, simply because they existed independently also of the documentary. And then I get a few, and when I'm saying I get checks, I mean minimal amounts, but they exist, they're on my radar. I just don't know how it all works together. Then all of a sudden ASCAP also sends me checks for the same. How do these all interact? How does it work?
So
What
I
is
can,
it?
I can explain that. I can explain that
They-
for you.
they-
From SoundExchange's end, you're dealing with the right that relates to, in your case, probably the sound recording, where ASCAP and BMI and CSAC are dealing with the performance. So, right.
Of the composition.
Of the composition. So you sound recording side on one side, composition on another side, right? Those are the two pieces of any piece of music. They're two sets of rights that you collect on. ASCAP, BMI, CSAC.
I think we just need to just take a step back even and just, do people
for it.
know what the two different copyrights of music are?
Let's just explain it, yeah.
So in recorded music, there's a copyright for the composition, meaning the song, the words and the lyrics and the music that you can write down on a piece of paper. And then there's a separate copyright for the recording of it. And that's how things get confusing, say, with radio, where you record a Beatles cover and it becomes a huge radio hit. The Beatles get paid, you don't get paid anything. But if that same thing is played on Pandora, you do get paid on it, because Pandora pays what's called a performance right on the sound recording. So the reason you're getting all these different checks from different sources is that some of them are paying for the sound recording, some of them are paying for the composition, and
some are paying for the mechanical royalties.
Yeah, for the mechanical royalties.
You might be getting a check from your publisher too.
I'm not quite clear why you'd be getting money though from SoundExchange for a synchronization that ran on CNN. That doesn't sound right to me. I mean, SoundExchange just distributes a limited number of non-interactive and some semi-interactive, like Pandora services. But it's possible that the source of the income was different than what you thought it was.
That it coincided with the documentary.
It could have coincided with increased
or
play
if CNN had done
on internet radio stations. That I would understand.
If CNN had done a audio-only recast of the documentary somehow.
Or like a playlist pegged to the documentary.
I mean, SoundExchange doesn't.
I would guess that would be through some kind of aggregator, though.
Here's what you do. I mentioned the Future of Music Coalition. You put in your calendar a 3-hour block of time. You get this infographic from the Future of Music Coalition. You get all of your data side by side of all these different things, and you look at the infographic and you look at where the stream and guess which path it trickled through. And then once you realize that it doesn't matter anyway, that you can follow the logical path, but it doesn't really make any sense after that, then you go back to promoting your bands.
We should toot their horn too. We should toot Future of Music's horn, because Future of Music, if you're unfamiliar with it, futureofmusic.org is a great place to get information not only on some of the topics we're discussing, but also on insurance for musicians. They have a wide variety of really comprehensive studies that they've done. They also have, once a year, an event that is one of my favorite events of the year, and they sponsor musicians. If you can't afford to go to it, it's not that expensive to go, but if you can't afford, they sponsor a limited number of musicians. It's worth putting yourself out there for a scholarship.
Didn't TuneCore put out a little printed book about all
Music
the
rights,
copyright and publishing stuff? Yeah, so that's a cool book they gave away for free. I don't know if it's still available online or not. That's another good resource for that question. Let's get some more comments, questions.
My name is Brian Keir. I'm music coordinator, music programmer, formerly Tower Records world music buyer for '94 to 2000, and then you guys are nostalgic for hitting. I went over to an internet radio company called Radio Wave, one of the first streaming radio companies online. From '99, I was freelancing to 2001 after the dot-com bubble. I'm just kind of, you guys are bringing up, and just as a reassuring and refreshing, that a lot of the streaming is regulated, it's quantitized, people are getting paid, whereas when we started at the dot-com in '99, 2000, it was a lot of Wild West. You know, it was a lot of, the laws weren't there, or the people streaming, who's getting paid, and so forth. So there's great progress, and thanks to you guys for putting in the efforts. I'm no longer in that game, but it kind of brings up some programming points that, as a gatekeeper, a former gatekeeper of getting world music onto platforms streaming, a lot of our clients at that time were like MSN chat rooms. MSN chat rooms in Korea were huge at that time. RollingStone.com was, putting up streaming radio players, and I created world music channels for, these outlets for getting music onto MSN chat rooms, onto RollingStone.com radio players. But there seems to be a lot less opportunities for streaming, for internet world music, other than the few, you got your Spotifys, you got your Pandoras, and trying to penetrate other avenues of streaming rather than just the big majors, as we're talking about now, of getting more outlets and ideas of streaming and getting more avenues for streaming.
Not only that, but monetizing some of the outlets that we haven't even talked yet about YouTube and SoundCloud, which are two of the, YouTube by far is the biggest on-demand service, and I'm willing to bet that 99% of the artists in this room don't make any money from it. And maybe 99% of the, well, maybe not 99%, but a large percentage even of the independent labels in the room may not make any money.
You've got to opt into it.
There's a lot of catch-up that has to be done on that particular platform. There's a lot of reasons why it's not properly monetized yet, but it will be.
YouTube has a system called Content ID, where if you as a record label or an independent artist send them a reference track, just a copy of your song, they'll put it into their database, and anytime anybody puts up a video with your song in it, they'll recognize it and they'll pay you royalties.
A birthday party with your song in it,
Absolutely.
for instance.
Or if you want, they can take it down. It's up to you what they do with, but as soon as they recognize the song that you've uploaded to them, they can follow your rules, pay you a royalty check, or take the song down.
That's a whole other can of worms, by the way.
It is, but to Dick's point, it's a big can of worms for a lot of musicians.
It's
and
the biggest can of worms.
Yeah, it's a great
far
way
bigger
for
than
independent
Spotify or
musicians
any
to
of the
earn.
other on-demand services.
Now, to your other point, there's a reason that all those promising digital music startups went out of business between 1998 and today, and that's because, for the most part, the RIAA sued them out of existence. Chapter 7 of my book, The Piracy Crusade, which Dmitri was holding up, has a ton of profiles of a lot of these failed music ventures, and they all tell the same sad story.
Is this your first public speaking thing after the publishing of this book, or?
No, I'm a couple in, but thank you.
It's early, right?
Yeah. It is. The book technically was published.
See how cutting edge
on
we
New
are in
Year's
world
Eve.
music?
Yeah. So we're a week and a half.
I'd follow up with saying the royalty climate for internet radio all across the world it's really tough to make a business. There was a time when MSN and AOL and maybe even Google, I'm not sure, were in this game, and they had to abandon it because it's just it's not profitable.
Yeah.
You got a couple more.
I'm Shira Sion, Executive Artistic Director of Keep Go Women's Vocal Ensemble in Oakland. We see Pandora's tower from our basement.
They can't hear you in the back.
Hi. Shira Sion, Executive Artistic Director of Keep Go Women's Vocal Ensemble in Oakland, California. We're neighbors of Pandora. I'd love to sort of shift the conversation a little bit from the monetization, which I think is kind of a frustrating point for a lot of us who've been in the business for a while. But I have two questions, one for Dmitri. As a publicist, how are you, as sort of the relationship meister, tech-savvy publicist, working with streaming channels? Is there any inroad for a publicist or an indie artist? I'm interested in the fan building, the audience development, the tour development potential that's there. And a corollary question for the panel, if you could offer 2 or 3 tips for independent artists, world music artists. I heard something about playlists, things that you can do proactively to increase your presence on the streaming services.
Right. Yep. Very practical. From a PR perspective, we're starting to view some of the people that have editorial power at streaming services and other outlets in a similar way that we do to journalists and other outlets and that sort of thing. It's a little frustrating when you're focused on something that they consider esoteric cultural music that doesn't fit into their economic scope to be pitching them on stuff, but we're still trying and we're building some of the relationships based on that. So it is a variable, but it's kind of a variable closer to Rolling Stone than to NPR in a sense, that you have to have the right fit a lot of times for the project to be able to get like a debut or an exclusive stream in advance of elsewhere, because we can't do the same thing that Beyonce can do. that's really the answer on that. I like your additional question. We are working with more clients who are generating playlists on Spotify, for example, and then publicizing them. The idea there is not necessarily that you're making a playlist of your own music, but you're making a playlist of other music, but you're putting your brand on it. You become a curator, and this is actually a big, I think, a philosophical shift that relates not only to streaming but to marketing and fan engagement across the board, is that musicians who become curators of a scene rather than just people pushing out their own music are able to generate a larger following. If you're able to be seen as a tastemaker in terms of what your influences are, as well as what scene you're a part of, then fans have another reason to engage with you. Earlier, we talked about having enough videos to go along with your album. Earlier in the day, this is another content area that's not that hard to create. You can create, here's the 10 songs that inspired me to write this song. And boom, it takes you like less than an hour to do that and get it out to your fan base. So there's that. I mean, on the curatorial level, I know that we're currently on the topic of streaming, but you can take the same philosophy and apply it to live music. There's an artist here in New York named Somi who books other artists as part of a series with herself and so forth. And there's other, Maklit Hadero does it in San Francisco. And there's artists who are doing that where it's not just about, here's my content, throwing it out to the world, but here's a scene that I'm part of, and we've got a live component, we've got a playlist component, and so forth, and then your music gets put in there, and your music gets put in there kind of in a visible way because you're the source of it. But I'd love to hear what other people suggest along those lines. Dick?
I'll add that. So I was involved with Spotify in their content acquisition phase for about a year, and during that year, as part of that, I built a ton of playlists on Spotify. And I'm continually amazed by how many subscribers I get on a daily basis to the, 100 or so playlists that I created. And the reason the only reason I can think of that people subscribe to me is because I took the time. In fact, there's somebody in this room, sitting right back there, Yale, who created a playlist on world music. It was a world music primer, and it's one of my favorite playlists that I still listen to.
Was it called World Music Primer?
It was called, no, do you remember what it was called?
Everything Dmitri should know about world music.
Everything Dmitri should know, that's exactly what it was. It's exactly what it was. But that's a good example. If you sit down, just sit down for a second, and everybody in this room cares enough about music that you can create a playlist. But
do you update your playlist?
I do update my playlists. I do. Yeah, and that's the other point, is that the reason some people are successful and the reason anybody in this room can be successful at a streaming service will be if it looks like you're active. If it looks like you're not active, if you've created a couple playlists, I mean, occasionally I'll look at somebody who followed me, I'll go over there. If I see 2 or 3 playlists, I'll skip it. I'll think, they're never going to update these things. If I go there and I see a whole bunch of stuff that they've created or that they've followed, then I might think, well, that's interesting. And even some of the obvious people that have thousands and thousands of followers, I'll go there and I'll think, I'm not interested in this. There's no curation here. There's no personality. It's just because they have a big name. But I'll find somebody who's small, who's created some playlists I like, and I'll follow them. And once you follow somebody like that, that person has an opportunity to build that platform into something. Among other things, if you go to a streaming service and create playlists and you're active on that playlist, you have a much better opportunity to be taken seriously by that company if you pitch them to promote your new record that's coming out. If you've never created a playlist on Spotify, don't go to them and ask them to
feature you
give
somehow.
you a nice feature in their myriad social media because they won't. But they will if they see that you're active there, or at least you have a good chance.
Along the same lines, you can do playlists on YouTube as well, and channels. You can have a channel where you're actually posting other people's content mixed in with your own content and create a sort of artistic voice beyond just the original content that you're creating, but also content that you're engaged with and influenced by or so forth. And one of the things that brings up is there's all these zillions of platforms, and if you're doing this curation and interaction and so social networking through all of them, obviously it's impossible. But you could, as a practical thing, take one a month and try it and see if it fits for your type of music, fits for your scene, fits for your personal lifestyle. Like, what does it work on smartphones if you use smartphones? Does it work on a PC if you use PCs? What do you have more live music than recorded music, or vice versa? Which one's better for SoundCloud? Which one's better for Mixcloud? Which one, all those things, and just like do one a month or do one every 3 months and feel like which one gets traction, and then from there you know which way to go rather than trying to do them all. And they all have different feelings too, and some are genre specific as well. Like some have more traction elsewhere. Anything else, or should we go to the next? All right, let's go to the next one.
Hi, Kimball Packard, Sound Advice Management. I have a comment and a question. I think independent artists have to look at all these streaming services and everything more or less as a form of advertising for them. I think we get too caught up in the tenth of a cent and all that, and how little money you might be making off of it. But I mean, ultimately, every product, in order to be successful, you have to have some advertising and everything. And if you can't afford to buy ads in Billboard and everywhere else, then the opportunity to have your music streaming on these services and a chance for people to discover you and everything, I think, is how the typical indie artist has to look at it. But along those lines, Drew, the Premiere program you guys do, is that a game that only major labels can play? I mean, how do you choose the artists for that program? And is it something that a small indie label can afford to do even?
Yes, it's free. We don't charge anything. It's editorial.
So it's strictly a curated editorial sort of thing?
That's right. And we've done everything from major pop acts to up-and-coming first record singer-songwriters and everything in between.
Great. And are you the person I would send?
Yeah, I'm on that team. Yes.
Okay, great.
Come see me after.
All right, thanks.
Cool. Last one, and then we're going to have wrap-up comments from each of our panelists. Oh,
Hi.
You can do one, Liel.
Check. Hi, Jose Conde. My question is for Pandora. While the song is streaming, can we, I haven't seen on there, do you guys have lyrics and links to the artist and things like that?
Yes, there's lyrics. There's now, as about a year ago, tour dates, and there's a click-through to buy to iTunes and Amazon.
You got that already? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I haven't been there in a while, but thank you.
This is kind of, I felt a little bit, I think this is one of the best times to be an independent artist in music right now. My name is Yale from a record label called Luwakabop, but it's like there's so much under your control. The gatekeepers aren't there in the same way they've been historically, and there's so many more things you can do. Unfortunately, to some extent, it's generational, and this room is a generation perhaps that doesn't want to deal with Facebook all the time, or deal with YouTube all the time, or do something like that. Those are the tools, though, that are out there that can make people understand what it is that you're interested in, and also what it is that you're interested in is interesting to other people. So it doesn't just have to be about, it could be about the place your music is from. It could be about other people who are important in the same area of music that you're in. It's all those things that are educational, that are informative. Those things have a lot of power for people. People explore so much more these days and are interested in such a wider range of music than they were traditionally. World music used to be a little bin in a store, and now there's people exploring, electronic music from Angola on YouTube and stuff like that. There's so many more people out there doing all kinds of things and interested in all kinds of things, and you can kind of get them interested in what you're doing, but you have to kind of give back to some extent. And you have to kind of encourage people that what it is that you're interested in is really interesting, and the music that you make is interesting too.
Awesome, thanks. Before you go, can I ask you, Luwakabop is kind of an anchor label that got involved in marketing and really building an audience for global music. What's your vibe on whether streaming services will help sustain record labels like Luwakabop and artists like the ones you release?
It's irrelevant.
Why?
My dad had 78s. I listened to 78s. I remember them when I was a little kid. My Kevin Healy down the block had a 45s with those RCA 45 players with the post. I got mono records because stereo records would get destroyed if you played them on your mono system. These are just formats. It's not. It doesn't really make a fucking bit of difference. It doesn't. It really doesn't. It just doesn't. Don't get involved in that. You're making music that is interesting and important to you, and all those formats are just there for you to get the music out there. You have no control over what they're going to be, what's going to be successful, what's not going to be successful, but that's the next format, and that's what you deal with. You don't rail against it. You don't worry about it. You don't. It's just ridiculous.
Thank you. Thanks, Yale. Dare we follow up on that?
Amen.
What he said.
I think that's a really great point. It's like we can get down to the nitty gritty and the this and the that, and how can you strategize for this and so forth. But it's like, well, are you going to make music or not? You know? And if you're not, then that's cool. There's no need to whine either for that reason either, right? But let's take, if we have one thing that you want to throw out there to wrap things up for us. It doesn't have to be the thing that summarizes everything you say, but it could be something that you didn't get a chance to say, or it could be like your favorite moment in the conversation, or it could be something else, whatever. Anyone want to go first?
I'll go first. There are many record labels for whom streaming music comprises at least 20% of their income. Streaming music isn't going away. It's going to stay, and it's growing. Almost every label I can think of is growing. Revenue is growing for artists as well. It's growing slowly, but it's growing. There's going to this is not I don't think it's a flash in the pan technology. I think it's a transformational technology. It's a shift. It's a different way of thinking. I think a great point was made that, the audience in this room, including myself, are an older generation that are potentially less comfortable and less integrated into the idea of working with digital music. But that's the opportunity that's in front of you. That's the equalizer that's in front of you. And it's really your choice on whether you want to jump in the pool or not. If you're going to jump in the pool, you got to jump in the pool. You have to go for it. You have to spend some time on it. If you can't do it, if you have kids, have them help you figure it out. I use the way I find out about EDM music, which is one of the genres of music that we focus on, is my 15-year-old daughter and her SoundCloud mixes. She's a much better DJ than I am. She puts together great mixes. So find a kid's friend, but you got to apply yourself. If you don't apply yourself, it's not going to go anywhere, or you're going to, like I said, you're going to get handed what's given to you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dick, Huey, Toolshed. Thanks for that, man. Appreciate it.
I would leave you with this. Music, long before it was recorded and long before it was a commodity, was an integral element of human culture and the human psyche. And I think one of the beautiful things about this kind of digital ever-presence of music is that it's returning to that role. Music is no longer something that gets kind of packaged up and shipped from point A to point B, and the industry, which was built on that kind of concept, is having a hard time adjusting to that fact. But we are adjusting as an industry. But the beautiful thing for you guys, as musicians, as music lovers, as people who want to use music to connect with other people, is that we can really kind of reclaim this role of music as a form of person-to-person communication. When I want to wish my wife a happy birthday on Facebook, obviously I say it to her face as well, but I'll put a video of Stevie Wonder singing happy birthday on her Facebook page, right? I'm using the music there not as a form of entertainment, not as a commodity that's being shipped into my life by a corporation. I'm using Stevie Wonder's voice as part of my voice in communicating my feelings to her. And I think the more that people who...
That's really beautiful, by the way.
Oh, thank you.
Very nice. Very nicely put.
Thank you. Well, then I'll just leave it there.
Aram Sinnreich with the Piracy, Crusade, and Rutgers University. Thanks, Aram.
Technology has lowered and broken down so many barriers. It's so much easier to make records these days, so much easier to make really good sounding records. It's so much easier to put them in hands of people that want to hear them without some gatekeeper or some expensive or laborious gatekeeper. And it's a lot easier to get feedback to and from those people. And that's putting the power in the hands of the musicians and connecting them directly with their fans. And that's only a good thing for the future.
Thank you, Drew Thurlow, Pandora. Appreciate it.
Bringing it all back home. I would just thank Yale from Luwakabop for that comment, because that really is, I mean, we're all here because we love music, and you got to make music even if you're not getting rich on it. But I would just, as advice, I would just say keep your eye on what's going on out there, and read, figure out the royalty statements, and sign up for SoundExchange, and read some stuff about all of this crazy technological and legal mumbo jumbo about how it works, just so that you protect yourself, because it's complicated now, and it's just going to get more and more complicated.
Cool. Thank you, Ben Sisario, New York Times.
Thank you, Dmitri.
Before we wrap up, I have a couple of things that I want to talk about. And actually, just spinning off of what Ben just said, read Ben's stuff in the New York Times. You can go to the New York Times and look up his name and read his articles and just add it to your feed of data. Read Hypebot. That's kind of a music technology blog that has a lot of good stuff. Billboard's doing great reporting on all this stuff as well. So they're really great things. Do you guys know that Rock, Paper, Scissors created the unofficial guide to world music showcases at APAP? Did you know that? It's been flashing up there, but if you go to rps.rondeville.com, you can get an app-like mobile website where you can heart the stuff you want to go to over the next 6 days and make your own personal list. Just don't clear your cache and your cookies after you've created it, because it's just a website. It's not an app. It feels like an app. So check that out. We're collecting business cards and email addresses from everybody who attends so that we can let you know about the next time we do an event like this. So where is the APAP volunteer? Oh, over there. She's raising her hand in the back. Make sure you give her a business card, because not only will we keep you informed about stuff, somebody's going to win a registration to APAP next year. We're going to be back at 2 o'clock with our next session, which is our World Music Website Demolition Derby. You can have your website critiqued by people in the music industry here. One more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much. Be back at 2 p.m. right here.
Hey, how's it going?